Alma Briscoe did not laugh when the palomino came through the gate, and hers was the only mouth in that yard that stayed shut. It was the 14th of September, 1893, the second day of the Purdon Vail estate sale at Sagehen in Tolliver County, eastern Oregon, and by 4 in the afternoon the old man's whole life had been sold down to the crates. A wagon with a cracked reach had gone for $18, a grindstone for $1.25, a marble-topped bureau that had come around the horn no further than Leif Odom's front room, and 31 head of ordinary horses had brought between $14 and $46 apiece, with no argument out of anybody. Then the yardmen swung the gate and put the last animal in the ring, and 112 people who had been standing in the heat for 6 hours found something worth waking up for. He was a palomino gelding, 7 years old that spring, and he was the handsomest thing anybody there had seen in a year. He stood 15 hands and 2 inches and weighed 1,050 pounds, and there was not a coarse line on him. His coat was the pale gold of new rope, of clean straw, of a wheat field 11 days from cutting, and it went nearly white along his flanks where the sun had been at him all summer. His mane and his tail were white as a gull, thick and hanging clean. He had 4 black hooves, which every stockman in that yard noticed and priced, and a long clean head with a wide place between the eyes. And the eyes themselves were a light hazel with a ring of dark around the outside, and they were not looking at one single human being in that yard. They were looking at the horses. Over the plank fence on the north side of the corral, in the shade of the barn, 31 head that had already been sold were standing in the sale pens, waiting for their new owners to come with halters. And the palomino gelding walked once around the ring, with his head up and his ears forward, and both eyes on those pens, and he did not so much as glance at the crowd. He walked past the auctioneer without seeing him. He walked past 112 people without seeing them either. "Now here is the one," said Nolan Pierce, who cried sales from Marlow to the state line, and had been doing it for 22 years, and had never in his life had to sell this particular animal, though he had watched other men try. "Here is the one, ladies and gentlemen. 7-year-old, sound, gentle, halter broke, harness broke, saddle broke, no vice in his mouth. And I will tell you right now that if you put a saddle on that horse and rode him down the road, every man you passed would ask you what you would take for him." Nobody said anything at all. "He will work single or double," Nolan Pierce said. "He will pack. He has been ridden by a woman, and he has been ridden by a man of 220 pounds, and neither one of them ever had a bad minute on him." Nobody said anything. "Somebody give me $60, Nolan Pierce said, and then, because he was a practical man, somebody give me $20. Down at the corner post, where he had been standing all afternoon with his arms folded on the top rail, Tolbert Rasco laughed out loud. Tol Rasco was the blacksmith at Sagehen, 45 years old, wide as a door, and generally the loudest thing in any yard he stood in. And he had a way of saying what everyone else was thinking about 4 seconds before they got there. "Nolan," he said, "sell that horse to a man that lives on an island." The whole yard came apart. Men who had been half asleep in the heat slapped the fence. A woman laughed into her glove. Somebody in the back said the thing about the island again, louder, for the people who had not heard it, and it went around the yard the way a good line does at the end of a long day, and Nolan Pierce stood up on his box and waited it out with the patience of a man who has been paid by the head since 1871. $20, he said, when it had run down. "He was in my garden the 9th day of June," Tol Rasco said. "Him and 11 others he brought with him. He picked the wire off my gate with his lip while I was eating my supper 40 feet away, and he ate the tops off my beets, and he let every horse in that town lot into my beets with him, and when I came out he stood there and looked at me like I was late. $20 is all I am asking. There is a mark on my shop door for every time that horse has been out that I have known about," Tol Rasco said. There is 26 of them. I have been keeping it in chalk for 2 years, and I am going to have to get a bigger door." $10, said Nolan Pierce. And that was when a woman's voice at the back of the crowd said, 9. It came out flat and ordinary and not loud, the way a person says a price for eggs, and afterward not one of the 112 people in that yard could agree on exactly when she had gotten there, because none of them had been watching the back of the crowd. They turned around all together and looked at her. Alma Briscoe was 32 years old. She was a tall, straight, narrow woman with a long brown face and black hair pinned up in a heavy braid under a flat-crowned hat, and she wore a faded blue prairie dress with a cream apron over it, because that was what she had, and her sleeves were rolled, and her forearms were brown to the elbow. She had come 11 miles that morning in a spring wagon for a pair of hames and a grindstone. She had bought neither one. She stood with her hands folded in front of her apron and let the whole county look at her, and she did not shift her feet, and she did not explain. $9, Nolan Pierce said. He looked at her for a moment longer than he needed to, because he was a decent man, and because he understood immediately what was about to happen to her. Then he did his job. $9 is bid. 9. Do I hear 10? $10 anywhere. 10. Nobody gave him 10. In a yard of 112 people, at least 40 of whom could have used a good gelding, and 9 of whom had money in their pockets that afternoon, nobody gave him $10 for the best-made saddle horse any of them had seen since the spring. Sold to Mrs. Briscoe at $9, he said, and wrote it in the book. She came through the crowd with a halter over her shoulder. People got out of her way a little more carefully than they usually did, and a man she had known since she was 19 looked at his boots when she went past him, and she did not appear to notice either thing. At the gate she had to pass within 3 feet of Junia Kirkbride. Junia Kirkbride was 54 years old that year, and she owned 2,200 acres of watered meadow on the Little Owyhee and the best horse farm between the Blue Mountains and the Idaho line. She had brought the first recorded stallion into that country in 1878 in a railroad car she paid for herself, and she had brought 2 more since, and the geldings that carried her mark went east on the cars every October, and sold in Chicago as harness horses to men who would never come within 900 miles of Tolliver County. She stood 5 feet and 1 inch tall. She wore black. When Junia Kirkbride said a horse was a good horse, banks lent money on it, and when she said a horse was not, the horse might as well have been a wheelbarrow. She was standing at the gate with her gloves in one hand, and she was not smiling, and she was not gloating, and she did not raise her voice at all. "Mrs. Briscoe," she said, "you have just bought my mistake." "Yes, ma'am," Alma said. "I know whose he is." "Was," Junia Kirkbride said. "He was mine. I bred him and I raised him, and I sold him for $60 as a 3-year-old, and I have been apologizing for it in one way or another ever since." She put her gloves in her belt. "I will give you $30 for him this minute, and you will not have to lead him home." "No, ma'am." 40? "No, ma'am," Alma Briscoe said, and she went through the gate. If you have got this far, and you want to know how it came out, stay with me and subscribe if you are of a mind to, because that gold horse standing in the corner of a sale corral in Sagehen with nobody's hand up is the one this whole thing turns on, and I want you here when this county finds out what it had been looking at for 6 years. She put the halter on him. He let her do it the way he let everybody do everything, which is to say without 1 ounce of resistance and without much interest, and then he turned his head and looked over the top of her hat at the sale pens where the 31 sold horses were standing, and he made a low sound in his chest that was not quite a nicker, and one of the horses in the pen answered him. Every man on that fence heard it. "There he goes," Tolrasco said. "That is the sound of a man losing his supper." She led him out of the ring and around the barn and past the wagons, and if she heard anything that was said on the way, she gave no sign of it. At the spring wagon she tied him behind and got up on the seat and clucked to the mare, and the whole yard watched the gold horse walk away down the Ruby Creek Road at the tail of a $9 sale, with his ears working back and forth like a man reading a paper, and Tol Rasco went home and put the 27th chalk mark on his shop door out of pure optimism. It was 11 miles to her place. She made it in a little under 3 hours, because the mare was 14 and the wagon was old, and it was dark when she got there, and she did the thing that night that nobody who had ever owned that horse had done, and it took her about 4 seconds and cost her nothing at all. She turned him into the meadow with her own horses. There were 5 of them, a bay mare called Duchess, who was 17 and had been her husband's, 2 4-year-old geldings she had raised and was riding, a brown mare with a foal at her side, and a little roan she used for the wagon. The palomino walked out into the middle of them in the dark and stopped, and all 5 of them came to him, which is not what horses do to a strange horse turned into their meadow at night. They came to him and stood around him, and there was a good deal of blowing and one squeal from the roan, and then the whole business was over in about 90 seconds, and the 6 of them put their heads down in the grass together, like a crew that had worked together for years. Alma Briscoe stood at the gate with the halter over her shoulder and watched that happen, and she did not go in the house for a long while. She had not bought a handsome horse. She had 60 acres of hay to get up and $41 in a coffee tin and a place that took every hour God sent, and she had not gone to that sale for a saddle horse of any kind. She had gone for Hames. She had bought him because of the way he came into the ring. She had been standing at the back of that crowd for 40 minutes, and she had watched 31 head of ordinary horses come through that gate, and every last one of them had done what a horse does in a sale ring, rolled an eye at the crowd, hunted the gate, worried about the man with the whip, looked for a way out of a small round place full of people. And then the gold one had come through, and had never once looked at a human being. He had come in with his head up and gone straight to the fence on the north side, the one with the horses behind it, and he had put his nose over that fence and blown at them. And then he had walked his circle and looked at nothing else in the world for as long as they let him stand there. Alma Briscoe had been raising and breaking saddle horses on Ruby Creek for 6 years, and she had been around them since she could walk, and she had never in her life seen a horse in a sale ring who was not afraid of the ring. He had not been in a small place full of people. He had been in a big place with 31 horses in it, and the people had simply not registered. That is a different animal, she thought, standing at the gate in the dark. Whatever else he is, that is a different animal, and I do not think one man in that yard today knows what he is looking at, including me. She was right about the yard. It took her nearly 2 years to get right about the rest of it, and it cost her almost everything she had. And by the time she could say it in one sentence, there was not a soul in Tolliver County who would stand still long enough to hear her say it. To understand what happened to Alma Briscoe over the next 3 years, you have to understand 2 things about that country, and the first one is what a horse was for. Tolliver County in 1893 was 100 square miles of sage and juniper and black rimrock lying between the Little Owyhee and the Marlow branch of the railroad. Horses were not sentiment there. Horses were the machinery. A man with 400 head of cattle kept 30 saddle horses to work them. The freight out of Marlow came behind 8 and 12 of them. Every acre of hay in that county was cut and raked and stacked by them. And when the horses were not where a man had left them, the whole work stopped where it stood. Which brings us to the second thing, and it is the thing that decided this entire story before Alma Briscoe ever laid eyes on that animal. In open country, the worst thing that can happen to an outfit is not that a horse gets hurt. It is that the horses leave. A man on foot, 40 miles from a road with a wagon and a cook and 9 hands and no saddle stock is not inconvenienced. He is finished for the week, and everything he was going to do that week is finished with him, and the beef he was gathering drifts, and the hay he was hauling sits, and every man he owes gets paid late. There is no fence on the open range. There is no telephone in Tolliver County in 1893. When your horses go, you walk, and you keep walking until you find somebody with horses. And then you have got to explain to him how you came to be walking. And that is why a horse that lets horses out was, in that country, in that decade, the single worst animal a man could own. Not a mean horse, not a lame horse, not a horse that bucked, because a horse that bucked could be ridden by somebody, and not a horse that ran off with you, because a horse that ran off with you only ruined your own afternoon. A horse that opened a gate ruined 9 men at once, and the 9 men were your neighbors, and the ruin came at night while everybody was asleep, and nobody could prove it, or prevent it, or watch for it forever. That was the animal Alma Briscoe led home for $9 and turned out in her meadow. Her place was 480 acres on the lower end of Ruby Creek, 11 miles from Sagehen by the road, and 7 miles if you went over the ridge, and she had come there in 1887 as a bride of 26 with a husband named Del Briscoe, who had a way with young horses and no head at all for money. He was a mild, patient, well-liked man who could sit a green 3-year-old like he had grown there. And in March of 1890, he had a wagon go over on him, on the cedar grade with a load of posts, and he lived 9 days, and he was buried on the bench above the house where you can see the whole meadow. She was 29. He left her 480 acres, a 2-room house, a barn he had built himself, 5 horses, and $310 owing at the store in Sagehen, which she paid off over the next 4 years in pieces of $9 and $14 and $20, and never once mentioned to another living soul. She kept the place by doing the only thing she was better at than anybody in the county. She raised and broke saddle horses, not many, 5 to 9 a year, out of 4 mares, and she started them herself in a round corral of juniper poles her husband had set. And she did it slow, and she did it without a whip and without a snubbing post, and the horses that came off Ruby Creek did not buck, did not bolt, stood to be mounted, crossed water, dragged a calf, hobbled, tied, packed, and would let a man get off on either side. From 1889 to 1893, she sold 27 head that way, at prices from $35 to $70, and every one of them stayed sold. Men who would not have taken advice from her about the weather bought her horses without asking a question, because the horses were the argument. She was not a talker. That was the first thing anybody said about her, and it was the last thing too. She did not raise her voice, did not haggle, did not gossip, did not go to the dances after Del was gone, and did not, at any point in her life, explain herself to anybody. She had worked out by about the age of 20 that a person could either spend their hours making a case or spend them doing the work, and she had chosen, and it had served her well for a dozen years, and it was going to nearly ruin her now, because there is one situation in this world where the work cannot talk for you, and she was walking straight into it in a blue dress, with her hands folded. The other person on that place was Ossian Rideout. Os Rideout was 68 years old in 1893, and he had come into that country in 1869 with a band of horses and had never done one other thing in his life. He had been the horse wrangler for the Rafter S outfit for 30 years, which meant that while 9 cowboys were out working cattle, he was the man who kept 90 head of saddle stock together, day and night, on open range, with no fence anywhere and nothing but his own judgment and a night horse to do it with. It is the lowest paid and least respected job on any outfit and always was. It is also, and every old hand knows this, The one job on the place that requires you to understand what a bunch of horses actually is. He had lost that job on the 8th of August, 1891, and he had lost it over the gold horse. Here is what happened, and you should keep it in mind, because for 3 years it was the only thing anybody in Tolliver County knew about the animal. The Rafter S was on the fall gather, camped at Bitter Wells, 41 miles out from the home ranch, with a wagon, a cook, 9 hands, and 26 head of saddle horses. They kept the horses at night in a rope corral, which is exactly what it sounds like. 2 ropes stretched between the wagon wheel and 3 stakes to make a pen that a horse could walk through any time he liked, and which held 26 horses every night for 30 years, because horses do not know that. Aubrey Stiles had bought the palomino that spring as a 5-year-old, off a man who had bought him off Junia Kirkbride, and he was the best horse in the string, and everybody said so. That night Os Rideout did what any wrangler would do with the best horse in the string. He kept him out of the rope corral, saddled and tied to the wagon wheel as the night horse, so that if anything happened, there would be one animal ready to ride. At about 1:30 in the morning, a band of loose-range horses, 60 or 70 head, came off the flat to the water at Bitter Wells. The palomino pulled back on his halter rope until the strap broke at the buckle, and he walked into the rope corral, and he walked out the other side, and 26 head walked out behind him. By daylight, the Rafter S was afoot 41 miles from home, with a wagon and a cook, and 9 men and 1 saddle to nobody's horse. It took them 6 days and 2 borrowed teams to get the outfit back together. They lost the fall gather on the north end, and Aubrey Stiles sold the gold horse for $22 to Leif Odom in October, and told the story of that night at every branding, every sale, and every funeral for the next 5 years, and told it well, because it was a good story and it was true. And he fired Os Rideout for tying the wrong horse to the wagon wheel. Leif Odom kept the gold horse 20 months and was put afoot by him twice, and sold him in August of 1893 to old Purdon Vail, who was 81 years old and wanted something gentle to drive to town, and who did not last out the month. And that is how the best-made gelding in Tolliver County came to be standing in an estate sale ring on the 14th of September with nobody's hand up. That is the part the county forgot inside a year. Os did not forget it. Os Rideout had spent 30 years learning that a bunch of horses is not a crowd, it is an order, and that the order has a top of it, and that if you know which animal is at the top, you can move 90 head across 40 miles of open country with 1 man and a bell, and on the night of the 8th of August, 1891. He had held in his own 2 hands the plainest, loudest, most obvious lead horse he had ever seen in his life, and he had tied him to a wagon wheel by himself like a sack of flour, and 26 head had followed that horse out into the dark, because that is what horses do, and there was nothing on this earth surprising about it. He came to work for Alma Briscoe in the spring of 1892 for his board and $6 a month, because nobody else would hire a wrangler of 67 with a bad hip. He put up her hay, he doctored her mares, he sat on a nail keg by the harness room in the sun, and he did not say very much. On the morning of the 15th of September, 1893, he came out of the barn and looked at the gold horse standing in the middle of 5 head in the meadow, and he stopped where he was, and he stood there with a bucket in his hand for a long time. "Where did that come from?" he said. "The Vail sale." "What did you give?" $9. Os Rideout set the bucket down. "Mrs. Briscoe," he said, "I want you to understand that I am obliged to tell you what that horse did to me, and then I am going to tell you the other thing, and you can weigh them however you want to. I know what he did to you. Everybody knows the first half," he said. "Nobody has ever once let me get to the second half." She waited. "In the old times," Os said, "when we brought horses into this country, we did not have fences, and we did not have corrals, and we did not have a man to spare. You had a band of 100 head and 4 men and 600 miles. And what you did was you found the one animal in that band that the others would follow, and you hung a bell on her, and then you did not herd horses anymore. You herded one horse. The rest was gravy. 9 times out of 10 it was an old mare, and we called her the bell mare, and I have known outfits that would not sell that mare for any price a man could name, while they would sell you their best saddle horse off the picket line for $40. And the 10th time? The 10th time it is a gelding, Oss said, and every fool in the country tries to ride him. He picked the bucket back up. I tied a bell horse to a wagon wheel by himself with 60 head of loose stock coming to water, he said. That is what I did on the 8th of August. It has took me 2 years to be able to say it out loud. That horse never done one thing that night that was not the plainest, most natural thing in God's world, and the only creature at Bitter Wells that acted like a fool was me. And I have been paying the price of it ever since, and so is he. Then why, Alma said, has nobody in this county ever heard you say it? Oss Rideout looked at her for a second with something that was almost amusement. Ma'am, he said, I am a horse wrangler. He was out for the first time on the 21st of October, 1893, 37 days after she bought him. She had shut him in the round corral by himself that afternoon, which is what a person does when they are going to start working with a horse, and she had gone in at dusk to fry her supper, and when she came out with a lantern at 9 o'clock the gate was standing open and swinging, and the corral was empty, and the 5 head were still in the meadow where they belonged. She found him at 11 the next morning at Aubrey Stiles's place, 4.5 miles down the creek, standing in the middle of 22 Rafter S horses in a fenced pasture with his head down in the grass. He had gone through 2 wire gaps to get in there. He had not gone through them. He had opened them, both of them, and left both of them shut behind him, which was the detail that Aubrey Stiles could never afterward be made to believe, and which Alma Briscoe looked at for a long time on her way in. Aubrey Stiles came out of the barn with a rope in his hand and stopped where he stood when he saw whose horse it was. Mrs. Briscoe, he said, you did not. $9. I would have paid you 12 to not, Aubrey Stiles said. He was 51, a good cowman, not an unkind one, and he had spent 6 days walking in 1891 and had never entirely gotten over it. Ma'am, I am going to say this to you once, in a civil voice, and then I am going to go in and eat. That animal is going to cost you your place. He is not going to cost you your place in some sudden way that you can get in front of. He is going to cost it to you a little at a time, and every dollar of it is going to be a dollar you paid to somebody else, and you are going to be the last one in this county to see it coming. She led the horse home. That was 22 miles of walking for her that day. And she went in the house that night and did the thing that ended up mattering more than anything else she did in 3 years. And she did it for the dullest possible reason, which is that she had been raised by a man who kept accounts. She got out a pocket tally book, the kind you buy for a nickel and carry to a branding, and she wrote at the top of the first page, Palomino. And underneath it she wrote, Oct 21. Round corral, alone, Bunchen meadow, 200 yids. Gate hook lifted. Found 11 a.m. Stiles pasture, 4.5 me, in with 22 head. Nothing hurt, nothing broke. 2 gaps opened, both shut after. She did not know she was starting anything. She thought she was going to keep a record of a fault so that she could learn the pattern of it and beat it, the way you learn where a bad fence washes out. That is what she thought she was doing for the first 4 months. And it is worth saying plainly that for those 4 months she agreed with the entire county about what she owned. She thought she had bought a good horse with a bad habit. The book got 40 more entries over the next 11 years. Not one of them ever said the same thing the county said. Now, the bell. She bought it at Fenimore's store in Sagehen on the 4th of November 1893 for 65 cents. It was a cracked brass cowbell about the size of a man's fist, with a dull, low carrying note, and she bought it for the most practical reason in the world, which was that she had spent 22 miles walking in October and had no interest in doing it again, and a horse with a bell on him can be found in the dark. She hung it on a latigo strap around his neck, and she never took it off him again. Wick Fenimore, who kept that store and ran 6 freight teams out of it, and was 37 years old and had never married, wrapped the bell in paper and took her 65 cents and said, "What is it for?" "So I can find him." "Everybody in this county already knows where he is," Wick Fenimore said. "He is wherever the horses are." And then, because he was the kind of man who thought about a thing after he had said it, he stood there with his hand on the counter for a second and said, "Is that right? Is that where he goes?" "Yes, every time." "So far," Alma Briscoe said. "Huh," said Wick Fenimore. That was the whole conversation, and it was more attention than anybody else in Tolliver County paid to the question for the next 22 months, and she remembered it for the rest of her life. The bell became the joke inside of a week. Toll Rasco saw to that. There is no defense in a small county against a man with a good ear and a shop that everybody has to come to. And Toll Rasco had a genius for the phrase that sticks. He called the horse the bell cow. He said Mrs. Briscoe had belled her horse like a milk cow because that was the only kind of stock she knew how to keep. He said that when a man heard that bell in the night he had better get up and count, and the fact that this happened to be excellent practical advice did not make it any less of a joke. In February he nailed a strip of tin over the chalk marks on his shop door and started the count over on the tin because the door had gotten rained on, and by the summer of 1894 half the men in that country had picked up the habit of saying "I heard the bell" when they meant they had had a bad night. And it was not particularly cruel, and it was extremely effective, and it never once stopped for 2.5 years. Alma Briscoe went into that store and that shop the whole time and never said one word about any of it. Here is what she was doing instead, and it is not romantic, and it took her 14 months. She was watching him open things, not catching him at it, which anybody could do. Watching him on purpose, in daylight, with a chair. He could lift a gate hook out of a staple with his lip in under 4 seconds. He could take the wire loop off a post, which requires him to lift the loop up over the top of the post while pushing the gate away from him, and he could do it with his teeth in about 40 seconds, and he was never in a hurry. He could work a slide bolt if it was not too stiff. He could pull the pin out of a hasp if there was nothing through it. He could get his nose under the bottom rail of a panel gate and lift it, and if the gate had light hinges and the pins pointed up, he could lift the whole gate off its hinges and set it down and walk through the hole. And she watched him do that twice, and timed it, and it took him 1 minute and 50 seconds the first time, and 44 seconds the second time. And she wrote down the thing that no one else ever wrote down, because no one else was ever sitting in a chair. He only did it when there was a horse on the other side. Not once, not one single time, in 14 months of watching, did that animal work at a gate that had nothing but country behind it. He would stand in a corral with an open lane to 3,000 square miles of range and a hook he could have had off in 4 seconds, and he would not touch it. He would go to sleep in front of it. Then you could put one old mare in the next pen 40 feet away, and the hook would be off before you got back to the house. By the spring of 1894, she had also found the other half of it, which was worse, because it was the half that convicted him. If he was in the pen with company, and a bigger band of horses went by outside, he took the whole pen with him. That is the thing that nobody in the world could forgive, and it is the thing that put 26 head into the dark at Bitter Wells, and it is a real fault, and Alma Briscoe never once tried to say it was not. He would open the gate to get to them. and the horses he was penned with would follow him out of the hole he had made, because he was the one they followed, and now there were 30 loose horses on the range instead of 60. What he was doing was not escaping, he was joining. He was doing the plainest thing an animal of his kind does, which is to go where the most horses are, and take his own with him. Because to him they were the same thing, and there has never been a fence built that means anything to an animal doing that. The county called it letting stock out. It is the correct name for the result. It is the wrong name for the cause, and every remedy the county ever proposed came out of the wrong name, and that is the whole story of the next 2 years. In May of 1894, Junia Kirkbride came to Ruby Creek. She came in a light buggy, with her foreman Cleve Tarrant riding alongside, and she drove into the yard at 9 in the morning without sending word, and Alma Briscoe came out of the barn with a hoof knife in her hand, and 22 months of what was coming written all over the visit. Mrs. Briscoe, Junia Kirkbride, said, "I have 22 foals on the ground at my place this spring that I cannot record." "Yes, ma'am." "Do you know why?" "I have heard it told." "You have heard it told wrong, whatever you heard," Junia Kirkbride said, "because there are 3 men in this county who tell it, and not one of them has the number right. So I am going to tell it to you correctly, in my own words once, and then I am going to make you an offer." She got down out of the buggy. She was a very small woman in black in a farmyard on a bright morning, and she did not look at the horses one time. On the 19th of July, 1893, she said, "I had 61 mares in 2 bands on the East End, 34 with the imported horse, and 27 with my own stallion out of the Rooker mare. The division fence between them is a wire fence with 2 gates in it, and the gates were chained. And I keep a man on that end whose entire employment is those 2 bands. That gelding you now own was in Leif Odom's field, which adjoins mine on the north. He came through the north gap. He opened the division gate. My 2 bands mixed and ran together for 3 days and 4 nights before my man found it, and by the time he found it, the thing that was done, and no power on this earth could undo it. I could not swear which horse was the sire of a single foal in either band. Not one. This spring I got 22 foals I could not register, out of the best mares I own, in the best year I have had in this country, and I will sell them in the fall as grade horses at about $37 a head. Recorded, they were worth $140 apiece, and I had orders for 9 of them in Chicago. That is $2,266, and it walked through a gate that my man had chained shut. Alma Briscoe stood in the yard with the hoof knife in her hand and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say. It was true. Every word of it was true, and there was not one thing wrong with any of it. "He is a beautiful horse," Junia Kirkbride said. "I bred him. He is out of a mare I broke myself. I have looked at 1,100 horses in my life, and I have never had a better made 3-year-old in my yard, and when I sold him to Sim Purvis in 1889, I stood at my own gate and thought, there goes the best horse I ever raised. And he is worthless, Mrs. Briscoe, and you are a horsewoman and you know exactly why, and there is no argument on this earth against it. He is not worthless because he is bad. He is worthless because you cannot keep him where you put him, and an animal in this country that cannot be kept where you put him is not property. He is weather." She took a wallet out of her coat. $75, she said. "I will send Cleve for him this afternoon, and he will go out on the cars at Marlow, to a man I know in Kansas, 900 miles from here. And he will pull a delivery wagon in a town where every gate is a latch on a stone wall, and he will live like a mayor and never see a loose horse again as long as he lives. You will have $75, which is 8 times what you gave, and I will consider the matter of the 22 foals closed for good." It was, by any measure anybody in Tolliver County could apply, an extraordinarily generous offer, made in person at 9 in the morning by a woman who had every right on her side. No, ma'am, Alma Briscoe said. Junia Kirkbride put the wallet away, and she looked at her for a while, and then she said the sentence that Alma carried around for the next 2.5 years like a stone in her boot. Then you have made him your opinion, she said, and I would like you to think about what that is going to cost, because it will not be paid by you, and it will not be paid by me. It will be paid by whichever poor devil is 40 miles out with a wagon on the night that horse hears something in the dark. The bill started coming due in the fall of 1894, and it came the way Aubrey Stiles had said it would, a little at a time, and every dollar of it was a dollar she paid to somebody else. She took 6 geldings to the Sagehen sale on the 6th of October. They were 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds, all 4 of them out of her own mares. All 6 of them broke the way she broke a horse, and the year before, the same 6 horses would have brought her something between $290 and $320, and she would have sold 4 of them before they ever got to the ring. They brought $186. The top one brought $44 to a stranger from the Idaho side who did not know anything about anything. The rest went at $26, $28, $29, $30, and $29 to men who had bought her horses before and had never once haggled with her over a nickel, and every one of those men was pleasant to her, and 2 of them apologized without ever saying what for. She found out why at the shipping pens from a 19-year-old hand who had not yet learned that you do not tell people things. They say a horse raised in with that yellow horse learns off of him, he said. Ma'am, I am only telling you what they say. Hoke Mandeville says he would not have one of yours in his corral now on a bet. And Leif Odom says he has got a 5-year-old out of your place that has taken to fooling with the chain on his corral gate this summer, and he never did that before. Did he buy that horse before I owned the palomino, or after? The hand thought about it. Before, I guess. That would have been in the spring of '92. Then, he never met him. No, ma'am, the boy said, and he looked at his boots, and there it was, the entire mechanism, standing in front of her in a stock pen in the shape of a 19-year-old who was not being unfair and was not being stupid and had simply repeated the only sentence in the county that explained anything. That is how it works, and it is worth stopping on it for a minute, because it was not gossip, and it was not spite, and there was not one villain in it anywhere. Horses do learn from each other. Any horseman knows it. A horse that has never seen a gate opened does not open gates, and a horse that watches another one do it 30 times will try it, and that is not superstition, it is observation. And any man who has run stock for 20 years has seen a habit go through a bunch like a song goes through a bunkhouse. The county had a fact in its hand. It had the wrong end of it. Because a horse can learn to pick at a latch, and no horse on this earth can learn to be the animal the others follow, any more than a man can learn to be tall. But nobody in Tolliver County was ever going to make that distinction, and there was no reason on earth why they should have. And so from October of 1894 forward, the phrase raised in with that horse was worth about 40% off the price of anything Alma Briscoe had to sell. She did not argue with a single man about it. Not one. That was her flaw, and this is where it started costing her real money, and Os Rideout told her so in November, sitting on his nail keg with his hands on his knees. You have got to go tell Hoke Mandeville to his face that the Odom horse never stood in a pen with yours. Hoke Mandeville can count as well as I can. He can, Os said, and he ain't going to. Because nobody counts a thing they have already decided. Ma'am, you keep waiting for the work to talk. The work don't talk. I have been listening to it for 50 years, and it has never said one word. She let it go. She had 60 acres of hay in the stack, $61 in the coffee tin after the sale, instead of the $200 she had counted on. And she got through the winter of 1894 on that, and on 14 head of yearling steers she wintered for Wick Fenimore at $1.50 a head, and in the spring she bred her mares and started 2 colts and did not go to town more than she had to. And she kept the book. Nove 3, Meadow, whole bunch. Range band watered at the lower gap, about 30 head. He went, took Duchess and the roan and both geldings. Found 7 a.m. 2 miles up the creek in with them, all 6 of mine still in a bunch inside the range band. Nothing hurt. Deck 19. Barn alone, storm coming. Lifted the bar. Found in the meadow with the bunch at daylight. Did not leave the place. Feb 2. Round corral with Duchess. Did not go. Range horses at the gap all night. Mar 30. Round corral alone gone in 20 minutes. Found at Vail's old place with 9 head of Odoms. That last kind of entry is the one that piled up, and it was 20 months before she saw what was sitting in the middle of it, because it was sitting in the negative, and human beings are very bad at seeing a thing that is defined by what is not there. The worst night of the whole 3 years was the 16th of June, 1895. There was a big band of range horses moving up the creek that week. 80 or 90 head, unbranded stuff and old strays, and about 20 of Odoms that had gotten out into the hills in the spring. On the night of the 16th, they came down the fence line of Alma's lower meadow at about 1 in the morning, and the palomino took the gate off its hinges, which she had hung on light strap hinges with the pins up, because she had run out of money for hardware in April, and he went out to them, and her 9 head went with him. And 20 minutes later, Lafa Odom's saddle bunch of 14 went out through a gap that she never was able to prove he opened. And probably he did. By daylight there were more than 60 head of horses belonging to 4 different outfits scattered up Ruby Creek and over the divide into the Poison Springs country, mixed with range stock, and there was a hay crew at Mandeville's sitting on a stack at 6 in the morning with nothing to hitch to a mower. It took 3 days to sort it out. 9 men rode. Alma Briscoe rode all 3 days, and was the one who found 26 head of the scattered horses in the rocks on the second afternoon, and she went and got them by herself, and brought them in at 10 at night, and nobody thanked her for it, and she did not expect anybody to, because it was her horse. On the morning of the 20th of June, 3 men came up the lane to her gate, Aubrey Stiles, Hoke Mandeville, and Leif Odom. They were not a committee. They had not been sent by anybody. There was no association in Tolliver County to send them, and there was no paper in any of their pockets. They were 3 tired, middle-aged neighbors who had been in the saddle for 3 days in June, and they got down and stood at her gate with their hats in their hands. And Hoke Mandeville did the talking, because he was the only one of the 3 who could do it without getting angry. "Alma," he said, "we have known you 8 years. Dell was as good a man as ever come in this country, and there is not a person here that has got a word to say about you. This ain't about you. I know what it is about. I lost 2 days of hay weather, and Lefe has got a horse in the rocks yet that he ain't found, and Aubrey's boy walked 11 miles Tuesday." Hoke Mandeville turned his hat around in his hands. "I am not going to stand at a woman's gate and tell her what to do with her own property. I would not stand for it if you'd done it to me. So I am going to tell you the truth, and then we will go home. There is no fence in this county that will hold him. There is no fence in this county that will hold him, because we have all watched 3 men try it, and you are the 4th. And every one of us has got everything we own standing behind a gate that is worse than the one he had off Tuesday. As long as that horse is in this valley, every one of us has got to lay in bed and listen. And I do not think you understand, ma'am, that we cannot fix this by being careful, because we cannot be careful in our sleep." "No," Alma said, "I understand it." "Then take him out of the country," Lafa Odom said. "That is all. Nobody is asking you to shoot a horse. Nobody in this county has ever asked anybody to do a thing like that, and we ain't starting now. Sell him east, sell him to a town, give him to the stage line at Boyle's Ferry. Do whatever you want, but get him over the divide. I cannot do that. Why? Said Aubrey Stiles. And here was the moment, and she knew it was the moment, and she stood at her own gate with 3 decent men waiting on her in the June sun, and she opened her mouth and found out what her whole life had been costing her. Because he is worth more than every horse in this valley put together, she said, and I cannot prove it to you, and you would not believe it if I could. They looked at her. It is the worst sentence she ever said. Every word of it was true, and the whole of it was a disaster, because there is no way on God's earth to hear that sentence except as a woman defending a pet. And that is exactly how 3 tired men heard it at 7 o'clock in the morning, and Lof Odom put his hat on. Well, he said, they rode off. Nothing was decided that morning, and no threat was made, and the 3 of them all spoke to her civilly for the rest of their lives, and by Sunday every soul in Tolliver County had heard what Alma Briscoe thought her $9 horse was worth, and Tol Rasco had a new line, and the new line was better than all his old ones put together, because it was hers, worth more than every horse in the valley put together. He said it in the shop, and he said it at the sale barn, and he said it to strangers. He would look at a broken singletree and say, well, get the Briscoe horse in here. He is worth more than every horse in the valley put together. And that summer Alma Briscoe fought the last honest fight anybody could have fought with hardware. And lost it, and won something else. She spent $23 she did not have at Fenimore's on hardware. Heavy strap hinges with the pins down, a hasp and a padlock, chain and 40 feet of number 9 wire. She rehung the meadow gate so that the pins pointed down and the gate could not be lifted, and she chained it, and she padlocked the chain, and she wired the top rail. And she stood back and looked at it, and it was the first gate on that place that horse could not beat. He beat everything else that summer, one thing at a time, and she wrote all of it down. But he did not beat that gate, and on the night of the 24th of July, 1895, she found out what her own gate meant. There were horses on the flat below the meadow that night, 15 or 20 head, moving north in the dark and calling. She was up. She had been up most nights that summer. She stood at the corner of the barn in her nightdress with a lantern and watched the gold horse walk down to that gate and go over it with his lip, hook, chain, staple, the wired rail methodically, in the order he had learned them, for 2 hours and 40 minutes, and get nowhere, and then stand at it, and call, and call, and call. He called until his sides shook. He did not run the fence, and he did not paw, and he never once tried the wire or the corner or anything that could have cut him, because that is not what he was doing. He stood at a gate he could not open, and he called to horses he could not reach. And at 3:30 in the morning she went down there in her nightdress and her boots, and opened the padlock with the key in her hand and let him out. He did not run. He walked out through the gate, and he went down onto the flat, and the range band came to him, and she stood in the middle of a June night in eastern Oregon and watched 18 loose horses come to a $9 gelding out of the dark and stand around him, and he put his head down in the grass with them, and that was the whole of it. She got him at daylight without a rope. He came when she called, and she went back up to the house and sat down at the table with the lamp, and got out the tally book and read all 31 entries in it from the beginning, and this time she read them the other way around, and at about 6 o'clock in the morning on the 25th of July, 1895, Alma Briscoe found the thing that had been sitting in that book for 21 months. 31 entries. 31 times that horse had gotten himself somewhere he was not supposed to be. And every single time, without one exception, when she got there, he was standing with horses. Not in a granary, Not in an oat bin, not in a haystack, not in a garden except the one time in Rasco's beats when he had 11 head with him, not on the road out of the country, not on the way to where he was foaled, not headed anywhere at all. 31 times out of 31, she had found him standing still, doing nothing, in the middle of a bunch of horses, sometimes 4.5 miles away and once 14, having opened as many as 4 gates to get there, and having shut 2 of them behind him, with nothing hurt, and nothing broken, and no fence cut, and no wire down. He had never once been found in a place where there was not another horse. She sat there with a cold cup of coffee and worked it all the way through for the first time. And it came out in 3 sentences, and they were the 3 sentences she was going to spend the next 14 months failing to make anybody in that county listen to. He is not getting out. He is going to. You cannot hold him with a fence, and you have never had to, because he can be held with 1 old mare and a shut gate, and it costs nothing. And every remedy this county has ever tried has been to take the company away and make the fence stronger, which is exactly backward, and that is why he has beaten every man that ever owned him. And the reason the others follow him through the hole he makes is not that he teaches them tricks, it is that he is the horse they follow. That is the whole property. That is what I bought for $9. She told it in town on the 3rd of August, 1895, and it went about as well as Os Rideout said it would. She picked the wrong room, which was the only room there was. Saturday afternoon at Rasco's shop, 9 or 10 men in and out of the shade of the open front, while Toll shrank a tire. Wick Fenimore across the street on his loading dock, Prudy Rasco sorting the mail in the front room of the house because Sagehen's post office was a table. Alma Briscoe drove in with the tally book in her apron pocket, and she stood in the door of that shop with her hat in her hand, and she said her piece in about 4 minutes. She said the horse had never been found in a place where there were no horses. She said the number, 31 out of 31. She said he did not open gates for gardens or grain or freedom, that she had sat in a chair and watched him ignore an open lane to the whole state and then take a hook off in 4 seconds for 1 old mare in the next pen. She said that if he was kept with company he stayed, and that she had 2 full years of nights and a book in her pocket to show it, and that the thing they had all been doing for 6 years, which was to shut him up tighter and by himself, was the one thing on God's earth guaranteed to put him through a fence. There was a silence of about 3 seconds when she finished, and in that 3 seconds she thought she had done it. Then Toll Rasco laid his hammer down and said, "Kindly, Alma, that is a real fine thing to know about a horse that is standing in my garden." And it was over. You have to hear the rest of it the way the room heard it, because the room was not stupid, and if you think the room was stupid you will not understand one thing about the next 13 months. Hoke Mandeville said, "So you are telling me the way to keep him home is to give him a friend." "Yes, ma'am, I have got 30 head. What happens when I cut out 4 to go to the hay camp, and he is one of the 26 that is left, and the 4 go past the corral in the dark?" She had no answer for that, because there was not one. That is exactly what happens, and it happened at Bitter Wells in 1891, and it is why the animal was, in strict fact, a hazard to a working outfit. And Hoke Mandeville had put his finger on it in 9 seconds standing in a blacksmith shop. Aubrey Stiles said, "You said he shuts gates behind him. 2 of them. The 2 wire gaps at your place on the 21st of October, 1893. I have got 40 years around horses, and I never seen a horse shut a gate." "No, sir, neither had I." "Well," Aubrey Stiles said, not unkindly, "there you are. And that is the whole trouble with a true thing that nobody has ever seen." She was standing in a doorway telling 9 men that the most despised animal in the county had a mind that worked in a particular way, and every piece of evidence she had was a thing she had watched alone. At night, in a nightdress, on her own place, written in her own hand, about her own horse. There was not one man in that shop who thought she was lying. They all thought she was doing what people do who get too attached to an animal, which is to build a beautiful house on top of the thing they cannot bear to give up, and the county had watched 100 people do that, with 100 horses, and they were right about 99 of them. It was Laf Odom, who was not the smartest man in the room, and was in a bad humor because he had a horse in the rocks yet, who said the thing that made the next 12 months happen. "Then prove it," he said. "How, put him in a pen and let him stay in it." And Tolrasko, who could not help himself, said, "Put him in the county pen. If he can hold a man, he can hold a horse." The county pen was the stock corral behind the sale barn at Sagehen, 8-foot walls of railroad ties set on end, built in 1888 with public money to hold a stray stock, with a plank gate hung on strap hinges 4 feet long, and the men in that shop had personally seen it hold a bull that had come off the cars mad. Somebody laughed. And then, in the way these things happen in a small place on a Saturday, it stopped being a joke over about 90 seconds and turned into an agreement, and Alma Briscoe was standing in the door while it did. 7 nights. The gold horse in the county pen at Sagehen, in town, where any man could look at him. If he was in that pen on the morning of the 7th day, then she was right about something, and the county would let her alone and hear her out. If he was not, she would take him out of Tolliver County. "And I will tell you why that is fair," Hoke Mandeville said, "and I want you to think about it before you answer, because I am not trying to trap you. Every one of us has got to be able to sleep. That is all any of this has ever been about. If he can stay in the best pen in this county for 1 week, then a man can build to it, and we will all quit talking. If he cannot stay in it for a week, then there ain't a thing any of us can do but what we are asking." "With company," Alma said. The shop went quiet again. "What?" "He stays with company," she said. "That is what I have been standing here telling you. Put a horse in the pen with him, and he will be there in 7 days, and he will be there in 7 weeks, and he will be there in 7 years. That is my whole claim. That is the only claim I have got." And Hoke Mandeville turned his hat around in his hands and said, slow, because he was working it out as he went, and because he was an honest man, and it cost him something to say it, Alma. "If the horse has got to have another horse with him to hold him, then he ain't held. He is just quiet for the time being. And I cannot go home and tell my wife that our saddle stock is safe, because a horse on Ruby Creek has got a friend. There it is. That is the sentence. And it is not a cruel sentence, and it is not a stupid one." And she stood there in the door of that shop and could not answer it, because on his own terms he was right and both of them knew it. He was asking whether the animal could be contained. She was telling him what the animal was. Those are 2 different questions, and the man who has to sleep at night is not obliged to care about the second one. She could have walked away from it. She was under no obligation of any kind. Nobody in that county had any power over her. There was no law, no association, no vote, no paper, and not one man in that shop could have made her do a thing. She took the test anyway, on their terms, 1 horse alone in a pen for 7 nights, because it was the only door in the county that was open. And because there is a kind of person who cannot stand to be thought a liar by people she has to live among, and because, God help her, she thought he might do it. He nearly did. They put him in on the evening of the 5th of August, 1895. Half the town watched. Tol Rasko personally went around the inside of that pen with a lantern and a bar and looked at every tie. And the plank gate was hung with the pins down and chained through the hasp with a log chain and a padlock, and Nolan Pierce, who was in town for the sale, kept the key in his vest because everybody trusted him. Then Alma Briscoe took the bell off him because a man had said, half joking, that she would have somebody out there ringing it, and she did not want to hear that said again. She hung it on the gatepost. She stayed in town all 7 days. She slept in the wagon behind Fenimore's store. Night 1, he stood at the gate for 2 hours and did not touch it. Night 2, he worked at the chain for a while and gave it up. There were 14 head of livery horses in Curran's pen 40 feet away, on the other side of the alley, and they talked back and forth all night. And every man in Sagehen heard it and thought nothing of it whatsoever. Nights 3 and 4, he ate his hay and slept standing up and did nothing at all. And men came by after supper to look at him over the wall, and by Thursday there was a feeling in that town that something surprising might be about to happen, and 2 men who had bet against had gotten quiet. On Friday morning, the 9th of August, Sim Yurgen's road crew hired every horse in Curran's livery barn to haul rock on the county job at the Cedar Grade, and the whole 14 of them went out of that alley at 7 in the morning, and the gold horse stood at the wall of the county pen and watched them go. Alma Briscoe walked across the street and asked Curran to leave 1 horse in the pen. Any horse. She offered him $2, which was 1/7 of everything she had in the coffee tin at that moment. Curran was sorry. Curran had a contract with the county for 14 head, at $1.25 a day per head, and he was not going to hold one back and lose $1.25 a day for 4 days. And, he said, and this is the part that matters, ma'am, everybody would say I fixed it for you. So she went to Hoke Mandeville and to Aubrey Stiles, and she asked them, in front of 8 men on the porch of Fenimore's store, to put 1 horse in the county pen for the last 3 nights of the test. Any horse of theirs. Their choice, not hers. She said it plainly, and she said it once. And they talked it over among themselves for about 4 minutes, and Hoke Mandeville came back and said no. And here is exactly what he said. Because Wick Fenimore was standing right there and remembered it for the rest of his life, Alma, if we put a horse in there and he stays, we ain't proved a thing, except that he stays when there is a horse in there. And that was never the question. The question is whether that animal can be kept. I am sorry. I know how it looks to you. But a fair test is 1 horse in 1 pen. There was nothing wrong with a word of it. She did not argue. She went back and sat in the wagon. He went over the wall on the night of the 10th of August, 1895, the 6th night, at about 2 in the morning, and he did not open one thing to do it. There were 30 or 40 head of range horses watering on Crooked Creek below the town that night. He got the chain rattling for a while, and then he quit that, and then he did the one thing he had never in 6 years been known to do, which is that he climbed. He got his front feet up on the crossbar, where 2 railroad ties had been braced on the inside of that wall, and he scrambled and hooked a knee over the top and came down the outside in the dark and skinned both hocks doing it. And he went down through the town of Sagehen at a trot past 40 sleeping people and out onto the flat. Curly Hoyt, who was 20 and had been paid 4 bits to sleep on the sail barn dock and watch, woke up at the noise and got there in time to see the last of him going by the church. They found him at 7 in the morning, 6.5 miles out on the Crooked Creek flat, standing perfectly still in the middle of 31 head of range horses with his head down in the grass. He had not gone another step. He had not eaten a stalk of anybody's grain. He had not run anything off. He had not cut himself on a wire, and there was not another human structure within 4 miles of him in any direction. 9 men rode out to look at it. Every one of them looked at the same picture in the same morning light. A gold gelding standing quiet in the middle of a range band 6 miles from a pen he had climbed out of at 2 in the morning. Alma Briscoe rode out with them and looked at the same thing, and it was the plainest confirmation of everything she had said in the door of that shop that she was ever going to get in her life. Laid out in the grass in front of 9 witnesses, and it did not do her one particle of good. Because what 9 men saw was a horse that had climbed an 8-foot wall to get out of the strongest pen in Tolliver County. That is the exact shape of the worst hour of her life. She was not defeated because the truth failed to appear. She was defeated because the truth appeared in full, in daylight, in front of everybody, and looked precisely to the last detail like the thing they had all been saying for 6 years. Hoke Mandeville rode up beside her on the way back to town and did not gloat, because he was not a man who gloated. "Alma," he said, "I am sorry. I know it. You will want a little time. Nobody is going to stand over you." "I do not want time," she said. "I said what I would do." She rode into Sagehen at 9 in the morning on the 11th of August, 1895, and took the bell down off the gatepost of an empty county pen, and put it back on her horse in front of about 20 people. And she said, loud enough to be heard, "He will be out of this county inside of 6 weeks." And then she got in her wagon and drove 11 miles home, and did not come to town again until October. Junia Kirkbride's offer was still open. Cleve Tarrant rode over on the 19th of August to say so. In the politest terms anybody used to her that whole year. $75. The cars at Marlow, a delivery firm in Kansas, a stone-walled yard, a stall of his own, and a curry comb on him twice a day for the rest of his life. "Tell her I thank her," Alma said. "And tell her no." Cleve Tarrant, who was a decent hand and had orders to be pleasant, said, "Ma'am, you have got to send him somewhere." "I do. Not there." It is worth stopping to say why, because it is the only extravagant thing Alma Briscoe did in 3 years, and it cost her $35 in cash money at a time when she had $16 in the world. A delivery firm keeps a horse in a stall. That is the whole business. A good stall, clean straw, a blanket in the winter, a man who thinks well of him, and 11 hours a day between the shafts with a driver on the seat and no other horse within 20 feet of him in any direction. It is the best life a horse can have in a town, and thousands of horses in every city in this country were living it and doing perfectly well. She had spent 2 years learning exactly one thing about that particular animal, and it was that he would take a wall apart with his teeth to stand next to something with 4 legs. So she took him the other way. On the 2nd of September, 1895, she rode out of her own yard at 4 in the morning, leading the Gold Horse, with a canvas bag of grain and $6, and a letter of introduction from Wick Fenimore. And she went south and east 96 miles to Boyle's Ferry on the Owyhee, where conduits freighted ore and machinery up out of the river canyon to the mines on the bench, with 60 head of horses and mules. And where, from the 15th of March to the 1st of December, there was not 1 hour of the day or night when a horse on that outfit was more than 60 feet from 40 other horses. It took her 4 days. She had never in her life been that far from Ruby Creek. She has never left any account of those 4 days. What is known is what Con Dietz told people afterward, which is that a tall woman in a blue dress rode into his corral yard at Boyle's Ferry on the evening of the 5th of September, 1895, on a hired-looking bay, leading the best-made palomino gelding he had seen in 30 years in the business, with a cracked cowbell on a strap around his neck, and asked him for a job for the horse. "I asked her what was wrong with him," Con Dietz said. "I have been in this business since I was 14, and nobody rides 96 miles to hand me a horse like that." She told me. She stood there in my yard, and she told me the whole thing. The outfit he set afoot, the mares he mixed, the gates, the county pen, all of it, and did not leave out one word of it that I could ever find out about later. And then, she said, and I remember it exact, she said, "Mr. Dietz, he is not a runaway. He will not leave a bunch. Everything he has ever done in his life, he has done to get to horses, and never once to get away from them. And if you never let him stand by himself, you will never have 1 minute of trouble out of him. And if you do let him stand by himself, he will come out of anything you have got." And I said, "Ma'am, I have got 60 head standing in one corral out there, and half of them sleep in a pile." And she said, "Then he will be the best horse you ever owned." And I gave her $40 for him, and she stood there and looked at that gelding for a while, and then she got on that bay and rode off. She did not say goodbye to the horse. Some do and some can't. She got home on the 9th of September. She had refused $75 in her own yard and taken $40 96 miles away, and when that got around, which took about a week, it was understood in Tolliver County that the Briscoe woman had now managed to lose $35 on top of everything else out of pure stubbornness, and Tolrasco said that she had sold him cheap to a freighter so he would be closer to home. And that was the first joke anybody made about it that actually had a barb in it, and Wick Fenimore told Tolrasco to shut his mouth in his own store in front of 4 people, which was the most anybody had ever heard Wick Fenimore say at one time. Now here is a thing nobody expected, and it is the reason Os Rideout smiled once in September, which he had not done all summer. Her own bunch fell apart. She had 9 head on the place. Within 4 days of the gold horse leaving, they had come to pieces into 3 little knots that would not run together. The 2 old mares at the head of the meadow, the geldings in the willows, the 3 young ones down at the lower gap, all of them fussy and hard to catch, and yelling at each other across 300 yards of grass at all hours. The 4-year-old she was riding got so she would not stand to be mounted. A colt she was halter breaking, that had led like a dog in August, put his feet down and would not lead at all. The whole place had the feeling of a bunkhouse with no cook. "They have lost their order," Os Rideout said. "You took the top off it. Ma'am, it will settle. Give them 6 weeks, and one of them mares will get to be the boss of the rest, and it will settle. How long does it take a good one to make an order?" "About a minute and a half," Os said, "and you seen him do it. In the dark. In this meadow. On the 14th of September, 1893, with 5 head that had never laid eyes on him. It did not have 6 weeks to settle. On the morning of the 22nd of September, 1895, 17 days after Alma Briscoe left him standing in a corral yard 96 miles away on the Owyhee River, she came out of the house at daylight, and the gold horse was standing at the meadow gate with his head over it, and his bell on and his hooves worn down to nothing. And her 9 head were bunched up on the other side of the gate in one bunch for the first time in 2 weeks, and every one of them was watching him. He had crossed 96 miles of rimrock desert in less than 9 days. He had come through or around 2 rivers, a rail line, 4 fences, and 60 miles of country he had never seen in his life. And he was not lame, and he had not touched a horse belonging to anybody along the way that anybody ever complained of. And when she opened that gate, he walked through it and into the middle of his 9 head, and put his head down and started eating. The letter from Condites came 9 days later on the mail, and it is the only piece of paper in this whole story that says the truth in plain language, and it was written by a man 96 miles away who had known that horse for 8 days. "Mrs. Briscoe, I expect he has come to you, and I hope so. I have got to tell you that this was my doing and not his. He was in the big corral with the whole outfit for a week, and he was the quietest horse I have got, and the other stock took to him so quick that my nightman remarked on it twice. Then on the 12th I put him in the barn nights by himself, and I am going to tell you honestly why I done it, which is that he is too good a horse to leave standing out in a corral with 60 head of mules, and I have got a stall in there with his name on a card, and I was proud of it. On the night of the 14th, he lifted the bar off the door and let himself out, and 22 head of my night stock went out of the corral with him, and I had my own back by noon. He was gone. I have wrote out a bill of sale returning him to you, and I enclose your $40 less nothing at all. If you are ever down this way, I would take it as a favor if you would come by and tell me about him again. because I have thought about what you said in my yard every day since, and I have run horses for 30 years, and I did not know it." She did not show that letter to one soul in Tolliver County for 14 months. What the county knew was that the Briscoe woman had said in the street in Sagehen that the horse would be out of the county in 6 weeks, and that inside of 3 weeks he was standing in her meadow again, and that he had gotten there by getting out of a freight outfit's barn and taking 22 head with him. Every part of that was true. Nothing in the world could be done with it. Aubrey Stiles came up the lane on the 25th and did not get down off his horse. "Is he home?" "He is. Did you send for him?" No, Aubrey Stiles said. "I did not think you did. It don't signify." He turned his horse. "Alma, I have got nothing left to say to you. I have not got a mean thought about you in my head, and I am done talking about it. You do what you want. But if I ever come out at daylight and find my saddle stock gone, I am not going to ride to Ruby Creek and knock on your door and be polite. I am going to ride to Ruby Creek and take that horse and lead him to Marlow and put him on the cars myself. And you can have the money, and you can have the law on me, and it would be worth it." That winter was the bottom of it. She had $28 in the coffee tin in November. There was no market for a Briscoe horse in Tolliver County. She took 3 geldings to the Sagehen ring on the 12th of October, and the best of them brought $24, and she took the other 2 home again rather than give them away. She sold Duchess, her husband's bay mare, 19 years old and past work, to a man in the Poison Springs country for $9, to a home she had picked out herself, and she sold 2 of the 3 young ones she had started that summer for $27 apiece to a stranger from the Idaho side, and she made $14 that winter breaking 2 head for Wick Fenimore, who overpaid her and made a poor job of pretending he had not. She fed 9 head through to April on 60 acres of meadow hay, and she got it done. She sat up nights. She kept the book. On the nights when the range bands came down the flat, she went out and put the old roan mare in the corral with him, and stood at the fence in the cold and listened to 2 horses eat, which was a sound she had come to like very much. And on those nights he never went anywhere at all. And on the 4th of March, 1896, Junia Kirkbride sent word by Cleve Tarrant that the offer was withdrawn, that she had bought 2 geldings in Baker City for the town work and had no further need, and that she wished Mrs. Briscoe well, and that was the last communication of any kind between the 2 of them for 6 months and 18 days. Every September since 1884, Tolliver County had gathered its horses into the blind pocket. You have to see the place to understand what happened, so here it is. 9 miles northeast of Sagehen, the country breaks up into black rimrock, and in among the rims there is a sink about 2 miles long and half a mile wide, with a floor of good bunchgrass, walled all the way around by a rimrock wall between 200 and 300 feet high, with no break in it anywhere except 2. At the lower end there is a mouth 200 yards wide, where the country runs out onto the flat, wide enough to drive a house through. At the upper end, at the head of the sink where the seep spring comes out of the rock and runs 30 yards and sinks again, there is a crack. That crack is the stairs. It is a fault in the rim, a crooked slot that goes up 300 yards at about 1 foot and 4, with 2 pitches of bare rock in it that a horse has to scramble, and it is 5 feet wide at the narrowest place and bends twice so that you cannot see the top of it from the bottom, or the bottom from the top. Somebody built it up with rock a long time before any white man came into that country, and the old-timers used it to bring stock down off the bench in the days before the road, and by 1896 it had not had a loose horse in it in 20 years, and there were men of 30 in Tolliver County who had never been up it. The blind pocket is, in other words, the finest natural horse trap in eastern Oregon. 4 men can hold the mouth of it. That is why the county used it. Here is how the gather worked. In the first 2 weeks of September, every outfit in that end of the county swept the horses down out of the hills. The whole works. Saddle stock turned out for the summer. Brood mares, unbranded stuff. 3-year-olds nobody had touched. Everything with hooves running loose on 400 square miles. And threw it all into the blind pocket and shut the mouth with riders. Then for a week they sorted, and the buyers came out from Marlow with their books and bought geldings on the ground at $18 and $22 and $30 a head and drove them to the cars. It was the horse business of that county for the entire year, all of it, in 1 week, in one hole in the rocks. In 1896, they gathered 417 head. It was the biggest gather in 6 years, because horses had been cheap for 3 years and everybody had been holding on to them. Alma Briscoe had 6 head in it. She had turned 4 young horses and 2 mares out on the range in April because she did not have the hay to carry them, which is the honest reason and not a proud one, and so on the 18th of September, 1896. She rode out to the pocket with Os Rideout to be there for the sort, and she rode the gold horse, because he was the best horse she had, and because she was 35 years old, and had stopped caring 14 months ago what anybody thought about what she rode. Nobody said anything to her about him. That is worth noting. By September of 1896, the thing had gone past jokes. Toll Rasco's tin count on the shop door stood at 44 and had not been added to since March, and men did not laugh when she rode in. They looked at the ground, the way people do around a person who has ruined herself over something and cannot be talked to about it. She tied him at the wagons, well away from the stock, with his bell on and a rope on him. And she went to work with the rest of them at the fence, and Junia Kirkbride, who had 58 head in that gather including 24 recorded mares, was 300 yards away all afternoon, and the two of them did not speak. Now the other thing that had been going on all summer, up above. Sim Yergin was the road boss for Tolliver County. And since the middle of May, he had had a crew of 11 men and 4 teams cutting a new grade around the top of the rim above the mouth of the blind pocket. The reason was money. The freight road from Sagehen to the railroad at Marlow went 11 miles around the head of the rims, and the new grade cut a shelf across the face and saved every wagon in that county 11 miles each way. And the county court had voted $30s and $100 for it, and it was 2/3 done, and everybody was very pleased with it. To cut a shelf road across the top of a rimrock face, you have to take the shoulder off. Yergin's crew had taken 900 yards of rock off the top of the rim above the mouth of that sink between May and September, with bars and sledges and 61 pounds of powder. And they had thrown all of it over the edge, and it had come down in a fan on the slope below, and everybody thought that was fine, because it was already the bottom of a rim, and rock lies where it falls. What is under a rimrock cap in that country is not rock. It is a soft, crumbling stuff that the cap sits on like a lid on a jar. And when you take the weight off the back of the lid and let the water at the seam and hammer it all summer with powder, a lid that has sat there since before there were horses in America will let go at a time of its own choosing. It let go at 20 minutes past 4 on the afternoon of the 19th of September, 1896. It was a Saturday. It was hot and still, and there had not been rain in that country in 7 weeks, and there was not a cloud anywhere. The road crew had knocked off at noon and gone to town. Nobody was on the rim, nobody was under it, and every soul in the blind pocket that afternoon was down at the head end, at the corral's working stock. The men who were there said afterward that the first thing was not a sound, but a feeling in the ground, and then a crack like the world's biggest tree going over, and then 40 seconds of noise so large that nobody could hear anybody yelling next to them. A slab of rim about 200 yards long came off the face above the mouth of the blind pocket and brought the whole slope with it. And when the dust cleared enough to see anything, an hour later, the mouth of that sink, the 200-yard-wide gate to the whole place, was shut by a fan of broken rock 60 feet high at the crown, running back into the sink 90 yards, made of pieces from the size of a stove to the size of a barn. Nobody was hurt. Not one man. Not one horse. 2 riders on the flat outside had their hats off and were 400 yards clear. The horses in the sink, 417 head of them, threw their heads up and moved about 100 yards up the meadow in a bunch, and then stopped and stood there. And here is a thing that men who were there told for the rest of their lives: those horses never ran. There was no stampede in the blind pocket that day or any other day. They moved up the meadow the way horses move away from thunder, and then they turned around and looked at it, and then in about 10 minutes they went back to grazing, because there was nothing to run from. The wall had simply gotten longer. By dark there were 30 men standing on top of that rock fan, and by 10 o'clock that night the whole county knew, and by noon on Sunday the 20th, every outfit in that end of Tolliver County was camped at the blind pocket, and the arithmetic had been done about 9 different times by 9 different men, and it always came out the same. 417 head of horses were inside. The mouth was shut with rock that a good crew of 40 men with powder and bars might open in a month, or might not, because you cannot blast rock down a hole that has horses in it, and every man there knew it. The grass in the sink was good for a while. Grass was not the problem. The problem was the seep. The spring at the head of the blind pocket comes out of a joint in the rock and runs into a plank trough that Aubrey Stiles's father built in 1886. And Sim Yergin, who was a road engineer and carried a watch, stood there on Sunday afternoon and timed it, and the seep filled a 40-gallon barrel in 58 minutes. That is roughly 1,000 gallons in a day. A horse in September in eastern Oregon wants somewhere between 8 and 12 gallons a day. 1,000 gallons a day will water something under 100 head. There were 417 in there. So we have got days, Sim Yergin said, not weeks. They will hold up 2-3 days on what is in that trough and what is in the grass, and it will be plain enough by Wednesday. And I am telling you all right now that I will not have those animals standing in a hole in the rock on my account any longer than that. This is my rock. I put it there. I want that understood. Nobody is saying it, said Hoke Mandeville. I am saying it, Sim Yergin said. So that left the stairs, and Sunday afternoon they went up and looked at it, 12 men in a string, and came down again quiet. Here is what they tried, and I want it on the record that these were not fools and they did not sit around, and that most of what they tried was exactly right. Sunday evening they led horses up. A led horse will go anywhere a man will go, more or less, and they took 19 head up the stairs on the end of a rope between 5 in the afternoon and midnight, one at a time, 2 men to a horse, with lanterns on the pitches. It works. It is also the slowest thing in the world, 22 minutes a horse on the average, and every one of those horses was a broke saddle horse that a man could halter. There were maybe 120 halter-broke animals in that sink, and 300 that had never had a rope on them in their lives, and the 19 head they got up on Sunday night cost them 7 hours, and every man on the place had blisters through his gloves. Monday, they drove. This is the natural thing, and it is what everybody wanted to try. 11 riders pushed a bunch of about 60 head up the meadow into the mouth of the stairs, and the horses went in, because horses will go into a slot when there is pressure behind them, and the leaders got up the first pitch and around the first bend, and stopped at the second pitch where the rock is bare and steep and the slot is 5 feet wide. And then they came back. If you have never seen 60 head of horses come back down a 5-foot slot at a run, there is nothing in the world quite like it, and nobody who was there wanted to see it twice. The men in the slot went up the walls. Curly Hoyt got a knee against a rock and could not walk right for a month. The whole bunch came out of the mouth of that trail like water out of a pipe and scattered down the meadow. And it took an hour to get them off the far end and settled. And then Aubrey Stiles, who was 54 years old and had been on the trail since daylight, sat down on a rock and put his hands over his face. They tried it 3 more times on Monday and twice on Tuesday. They tried it with fewer horses, and with more men, and with ropes strung along the slot, and with a man on foot ahead of the leaders, and with slickers, and with a wing of riders on the meadow to squeeze the bunch. They got 21 head over the top on Monday, and 26 on Tuesday morning, and 12 of those came back down through the drive an hour later. On Tuesday afternoon, Junia Kirkbride sent Cleve Tarrant 9 miles to her place for a 22-year-old chestnut mare called Kettle, who had led every string of colts she had raised for 15 years, and who would follow a man carrying a grain bucket straight through a plank wall. They put a bell on that mare and led her up the stairs at the head of 50 head of horses. Kettle went up beautifully. She went up like a lady. She went up alone, and the 50 head stood in the mouth of the trail and watched her go, and then broke and went back down the meadow, and there is not one thing anybody could have done about it. And Junia Kirkbride stood at the bottom of that slot, with her hands folded in front of her, and watched her own good mare come back down the trail by herself at 7 o'clock in the evening with a bell around her neck. That was the end of Tuesday. 54 head out of 417 were on the bench. 363 were in the hole. The trough was drawn down to mud twice a day and filling slower than it was being drunk, and every man on that rim had figured out for himself that they were going to lose this thing to a spring, and one of them said out loud at the fire that night that a man could stand on a rock and watch a county go broke. And Ocean Rideout, 71 years old, who had not been asked one question by anybody in 6 days, stood up on the other side of that fire with his hat in his hands and said it. "You ain't got a lead horse problem," he said. "You got a lead horse. There is exactly one animal in the state of Oregon that them 363 head will follow up a hole in the rock in the dark, and he is tied to the tailgate of a wagon 300 yards from where I am standing with a bell on him, and every one of you has spent 6 years trying to get him out of this county." Nobody answered him. 20-odd men looked into a fire. And then Junia Kirkbride, who was 57 years old and 5 feet and 1 inch tall, and had 58 head in that hole, including every recorded mare she owned, got up off a rock and walked 300 yards in the dark, past the wagons, to where a tall woman in a blue dress was sitting on a wagon tongue with a bell in her lap and a horse tied behind her. "Mrs. Briscoe," she said. "Ma'am, I have come to ask you for your horse. I know it. Then I will say the rest of it standing up, because I have got no intention of saying it twice." Junia Kirkbride put her hands behind her back. "I bred him. I raised him out of the best mare I ever owned, and I sold him for $60 as a 3-year-old, because he was too handsome to keep, and I needed a stallion fee that spring. I have spent 6 years telling this county he was worthless, and I have said it in this county's hearing at least 100 times. And I offered you $75 in your own yard to put him on the cars. And every word I said about him was correct on the facts, and every bit of it was wrong. And I have known it was wrong since about 7 o'clock this evening, when I watched my own mare come back down that trail by herself. I do not know what he is worth. I know what my judgment is worth, and after tonight it is not worth what it was on Saturday." Alma Briscoe stood up. "He will not do it on a rope," she said. "I beg your pardon?" "He will not lead them up on a rope. I can lead him up the stairs, and 363 head will stand at the bottom and watch him go, the same as they watched your mare. Because a horse on the end of a rope with a man on the other end of it is not a lead horse. He is baggage." She was not talking to Junia Kirkbride anymore. Sim Jurgen had come up, and Hoke Mandeville, and Aubrey Stiles, and 8 or 9 others, and they were standing in a half circle in the dark. If you want this done, you have got to turn him loose. Loose in the sink with 363 head, no rope, no halter, nobody on him. And every one of you has spent 6 years saying that a loose horse in this country is the one thing you cannot have. Silence. He will go up, she said, because I will walk up ahead of him, and he will come to me. And then he will come back down for the rest of them by himself, and he will do that as many times as it takes. And there is not one thing in the world I can do to make him, and not one thing in the world I can do to stop him. And if he don't come back down, Sim Jurgen said, then he is on the bench in the dark with 50 head of loose horses, Alma Briscoe said, and I have lost my horse, and you have lost your gather, and I have got no argument to offer you against that, except that I have watched him for 3 years, and he has never once in his life gone anywhere, except toward the most horses he could get to. There is 363 of them at the bottom of that trail, and 54 on top. He will come back down. He will come back down every time until there is nobody left down there to come back for. Hoke Mandeville said, quietly, that is what you told us in the shop. Yes, sir. It is. And we said a fair test was 1 horse in 1 pen. You did. Hoke Mandeville looked at the fire for a while. Well, he said, this here is 417 horses in a hole in the rocks, and I do not know what is fair any more, and I am about done caring. Turn him loose. They started at 20 minutes past 5 in the morning on Wednesday the 23rd of September, 1896. And they finished at 40 minutes past midnight on Thursday morning, and in between they made 11 trips up the stairs and brought 363 head of horses out of the blind pocket without losing one. Here is how it went, because the details are the only thing that does it justice. She took the rope off him at the head of the sink in the gray light with about 90 men and women standing along the rock. She took the halter off, too. She left the bell on. Then she turned her back on a loose horse in open country in front of the whole county and started walking up the stairs with a lantern she did not need yet, and behind her the gold horse stood still for about 4 seconds and then walked after her, and behind him 34 head of horses that had been cut off from the main bunch and pushed up to the mouth of the trail walked after him. The first pitch took 9 minutes. She got up on the rock above the second bend, where she could see down the slot, and she sat down there and did not move again, and the gold horse came up the second pitch past her, without looking at her, and went on up the slot with 34 heads strung out behind him, in single file, with their noses at each other's tails. And at the top cleaved Tarrant, and 4 men had a rope wing strung, and turned them out onto the bench. 51 minutes. Then the whole thing turned on the part nobody could control, which is that he had to come back. He stood at the top of the stairs on the bench, with 88 head of horses around him, in the open, at daylight, with 400 square miles of Oregon in front of him and not a fence anywhere in it, and Alma Briscoe sat on a rock 200 yards below him and did not call him. Because, she said afterward, if she had called him and he had come, no man in that county would have believed the rest of it as long as he lived. He put his head up and looked out over the bench for the better part of a minute. Then he turned around and went back down the hole in the rock, alone, at a walk, with his bell going, past 400 people who could hear it, and not one who could see him, and came out at the bottom into 329 head of horses, and walked into the middle of them, and stopped. Aubrey Stiles said something at that moment that he had to apologize to 2 women for later. Trip 2 was 40 head, and took 44 minutes. Trip 3 was 46 head, and took 50 minutes. By trip 3, the men had learned to quit pushing. What worked was to cut a bunch off, bring the gold horse into the middle of it, let him stand there for 3 or 4 minutes until whatever it is that happens between horses had happened, and then have Alma start walking up the trail. He followed her. They followed him. The riders did not touch them at all after the first 100 yards. The bell was the thing that made it possible, and Os Rideout had said so on Tuesday night, and nobody had understood him until they saw it. The stairs bends twice. A horse 60 yards back in that slot cannot see the horse in front of him, and cannot see the top, and cannot see the sky. And what he can do is hear a cracked brass bell going up ahead of him at a steady walk, and every horse in that string kept walking toward a sound. Two of the men said afterward that the worst part of the whole day was standing at the bottom in the quiet, with a bunch of horses waiting to go, and hearing that bell coming back down. Trip 5 was the bad one. It was 1 in the afternoon, and it was 56 head, too many, and a 3-year-old that had never had a hand on him in his life got turned around at the second pitch and started back, and the 8 horses behind him turned with him, and Alma Briscoe was on the trail below them, on foot, in a 5-foot slot, with 56 head of horses in it. She got in against the wall in a place where the rock undercuts about 2 feet, and she put her arms over her head. And the gold horse came back down through his own string. He came down past 30 head of horses in a slot 5 feet wide, which is a thing no man there had ever seen a horse do, shouldering them into the wall, and he got below the 3-year-old that had turned, and he put his head down and drove him back up the trail, and the whole string went up in front of him, and 40 seconds later the slot was empty above her, and there was a horse standing over her in the dark of the undercut with his bell hanging down by her shoulder. She stayed sitting there for a minute. Then she got up and put her hand flat on his neck and said something to him that nobody heard, and they went on up. Trips 6, 7, 8, and 9 took them into the evening. Somebody rode to Sagehen and came back with every lantern in the town, 41 of them, and they hung them the length of the stairs on the rock, and from the flat outside the mouth of the sink, 9 miles from Sagehen, people who had driven out to look at it said the crack in the rim looked like a lighted street. Trip 10 went up at 10:30 at night with 39 head. The 11th trip was 31 head, and it was the last of them. And it included the 2 old mares that had been the hardest all day, and Junia Kirkbride's 4 best recorded mares, which she had personally cut into the last bunch because she had said that morning in front of witnesses that if the horse was going to do it, she was not going to have her own stock be the ones he did not do it for. They came up out of the blind pocket at 22 minutes past midnight, and the last animal onto the bench was a gold gelding with a cracked cowbell on a latigo strap, and behind him at the top of the stairs there was not one horse left in the hole in the rocks. Sim Yirgin counted them on the bench with a lantern and his tally book. He counted them twice. 417 head had gone into the blind pocket on the 18th of September. And 417 heads stood on the bench above it in the dark on the morning of the 24th, and there was not one animal in that county lost, hurt or unaccounted for. And then, for the second time in 6 days, 90 people stood on a rock in eastern Oregon and did not say one word. Alma Briscoe walked out of the top of the stairs at 40 minutes past midnight with a lantern in one hand, and she had been on her feet for 19 hours, and she was not crying, and she did not raise her hand or her voice or say anything at all to anybody. She walked over to the wagons and got a currycomb out of her war bag and went to work on a horse. It was Junia Kirkbride who spoke, because it had to be her, and everybody there knew it had to be her. She got up on a wagon wheel so that she could be seen, which was a thing she had never in her life done, and she said it loud, in her own words, in front of every man in that end of Tolliver County. I bred that horse. I sold him for $60 when he was 3 years old, and I have spent 6 years telling every one of you that he was worthless. And you all believed me, and you were right to believe me, because I am the best judge of a horse in this county, and I have been for 25 years. I was wrong. That woman has been right since 1893, and she has told us so in plain language at least 4 times that I know of, and we would not hear it, and I would not hear it, and I offered her $75 to put the best horse in the state of Oregon on a railroad car. There is nothing more that I intend to say about it, and I will thank all of you never to ask me to. Then she got down off the wheel and walked over and stood beside Alma Briscoe and held the lantern for her while she curried a horse, which took about 20 minutes, and the two of them did not speak the whole time. Tol Rasco got home to Sagehen at about 9 on Thursday morning, and he did not go in the house, and he did not go in the shop. He went and stood in front of his own shop door for a while, with his hat in his hand, looking at a strip of tin with 44 chalk marks on it that he had been keeping since 1893, and then he pulled the tin off the door with a bar, 4 nails, and carried it around back and put it in the scrap pile, and never said one word about it to anybody as long as he lived. His wife Prudy told it 20 years later. He never did. The county opened the stairs the next summer. Sim Yergin took his crew and $400 of the road money and spent 5 weeks widening the 2 pitches and building up the outside of the bends with rock, and when the court asked him what to call it in the book, he said to call it the Bell Trail, and that is what it is called on the county map of Tolliver County to this day, and there is not one word on that map about a horse. They gathered into the blind pocket again in September of 1897, and every September after, because it was still the best trap in the country, and they never again opened the lower mouth. They did not need to. They put the horses in at the top, and they took them out at the top, up and down a 5-foot slot in the rimrock. And from 1897 forward, there was always a belled horse at the head of the string. And by about 1903, there were men working that gather who had no idea why. Alma Briscoe sold 9 geldings at the Sagehen ring on the 4th of October, 1897, and they averaged $61 a head, and the top one brought $95 to a man who had come 130 miles because of something he had heard in a hotel in Baker City. By 1900, the phrase a Briscoe horse meant a horse that would stand tide, cross water, lead, pack, and get along with any animal you put him with, and it was worth about $15 a head over the market, and she never in her life advertised, and she never once explained what she did or why, which by then was no longer a flaw, and had become a kind of trademark. Junia Kirkbride sent her 11 head of 3-year-olds to be started in the spring of 1897 and 14 in 1898 at $12 a head. And the two of them worked side by side for 18 years, and were not exactly friends, and were something better. And when Junia Kirkbride died in 1914, she left instructions that Mrs. Briscoe was to have the pick of her mares. And Mrs. Briscoe took an ugly little roan out of the 3rd band, and turned down 2 of the best bred mares in the state, and it is said that Junia would have laughed at that. Once, Os Rideout lived until March of 1901, and spent his last 4 years being asked questions by men who had not asked him anything in 30 years, which he enjoyed a great deal more than he let on. He is buried on the bench above the Ruby Creek meadow next to Del Briscoe, which was Alma's doing, and cost her an argument with a preacher. The thing he said to her that she quoted for the rest of her life was said on his nail keg in the sun in about 1899, when a man from the Idaho side had come to look at horses and had asked in a general way how she had known. She didn't know, Os Rideout said. There is nothing to know. Every hand in this country has watched horses follow one horse every day of his working life and thought nothing about it at all, the same as you have watched water run downhill. She is just the only one that ever asked what it was for. Wick Fenimore sold the store in 1899 and freighted full-time, and came out to Ruby Creek about twice a month for 8 years to fix things that did not need fixing. And in the spring of 1904, when she was 43 and he was 45, they were married in the front room of Prudy Rasco's house with 9 people there and no fuss of any kind. and he moved his 4 teams to her barn, and she never changed the name of the place. He is the man who found the Condite's letter in her tally book in 1906 and read it and put it back and never mentioned it. And he is the reason we have any of this at all, because he is the one who wrote it out, all of it, in a ledger book in 1921 for the county history that was never published, and left the ledger in the courthouse at Sagehen, where it sat for 60 years. The horse lived until the 9th of April 1908, and he was 22 years old, and he was the boss of the horses on that place from the night he arrived in 1893 until the morning he was gone, which is 14 years and 7 months, and in all that time Alma Briscoe never fixed him and never tried. He opened gates until the last year of his life. He took the hardware off anything she hung, and when she hung it so he could not, he stood at it and called, and she went down and let him through. In 1899, she took the gate off the meadow entirely and hung it on the barn wall on 2 spikes, where it stayed, and she fenced the whole 480 acres instead and put every animal she owned inside one fence, which cost her $340 she borrowed from the bank at Marlow and paid back in 3 years, and after that there was nothing on the Ruby Creek place for a horse to open, and there was no reason on earth for him to want to. He got out twice more in 14 years. Both times there were range horses on the flat below the meadow, and both times she found him standing in the middle of them at daylight doing absolutely nothing. And both times she walked up to him in the grass and put a hand on his neck, and the 2 of them came home. And she wrote both of them down in the book, entries 40 and 41, in the same hand as the first one, in 1901 and in 1904. The bell hung on a nail by the harness room door for 31 years after that. Wick Fenimore's ledger says she took it off him on the day the stairs was finished in the summer of 1897, and that he never wore it again, because after that everybody in Tolliver County knew where he was. There is a thing about all this that she said only once, in 1919, when a young man from the agricultural college came out to Ruby Creek to talk to her about horses, and asked her, in the way that young men ask, what the lesson was. She was 58 by then. She thought about it for a while. There was never anything wrong with that horse, and there was never anything wrong with those men, she said. A man in this country looks at an animal and asks what it will do for him with a rope on it. That is the only question there is out here, and it is a fair question, and I have asked it myself 1,000 times. But there was one thing about that horse that could not be found out that way, not in 100 years, because it never showed up until you turned him loose. And there is not a man alive who is going to turn a horse loose to find out what he is worth. I did not know a thing they did not know. I had a chair, and I had a book, and I had nowhere else to be. That is all it ever was. The county map still says Bell Trail. The gate is still on the wall of that barn, though the barn has a tin roof now, and the house is gone. And there is a strip of grass on the bench above the blind pocket, where 417 head of horses stood in the dark on the 24th of September, 1896, and every one of them had walked up a 5-foot crack in the rimrock behind a $9 gelding that a whole county had spent 6 years trying to get rid of. Because that is the way it usually goes. Out where the ground is hard, and the money is short, and every man has to be right about a horse by Saturday. The thing everybody agrees on is almost never a lie. It is just the front of the animal, seen once, at a distance, by people with somewhere to be. And what a thing is worth is not what it does at the end of your rope. It is what it does when nobody is holding it at all.